Now, let's get into our own democracy here. And new laws being put to Parliament to force us to provide or present our identity, our ID, prove our ID when we vote. Why hasn't this happened for the last 100 years? I don't know. Let's check in with James McGrath, LMP Senator for Queensland. Good to talk to you, James. You've been a political campaigner around the world, around Australia, in the UK and elsewhere. It is an anomaly, isn't it, for us to turn up at a ballot box and just vote without having to identify ourselves? There are plenty of cases where the same name has voted a number of times in the one electorate.
Totally. It's quite weird. Canada, France, Belgium, Sweden, the UK is bringing in. All these other liberal democracies require voter ID, and most people expect to show ID. If you're going to go to, say Fridays, Riverside, and have a Cosmopolitan or have a beer on a Friday night, you've got to show ID. So why shouldn't you have to show ID when you're going to perform your most important civic duty, and that is exercising your vote? So the bill that came in yesterday, introduced by Ben Morton, it's a pretty sensible, moderate, actually almost small C conservative reform. It just says you've got to show a form of ID before you get a ballot paper. It could be a driver's licence. You don't have that. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no, look, it makes so much sense to most of us, but there are critics, and Labor is among them, and they say that this will particularly suppress the vote of those people who are disadvantaged, and certainly Indigenous Australians, particularly in remote areas. Have a listen to Anthony Albanese talking about what the impact of this legislation could be. Oh, we don't have him there, but Anthony Albanese says that this is going to suppress the vote in Indigenous communities, and he likens it to voter suppression measures in the US. What's your response to that? Will it make it harder for people to cast a vote anywhere?
Not at all, and it's disappointing the Labor Party have taken such a partisan approach to a very sensible reform that is all about protecting the sanctity of the electoral roll. Indeed, under the reforms proposed by the government, especially in remote Indigenous communities, if you don't have ID, you can be vouched for by someone who is already on the electoral roll and be issued with a declaration vote. If you're homeless, the same thing can happen. No one is going to be stopped from voting. Indeed, what this does is ensure that everybody who is entitled to a vote is given a vote, and all votes are treated equally, and it will limit the ability of people to play the system and commit electoral fraud.
It makes a lot of sense, but that doesn't mean it'll happen. But let's get it happening, and then you can try for voluntary voting. That'll be the next hurdle, hey?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in voluntary voting, but it's not on the government's agenda.
Thanks for joining us, James. I appreciate it. James McGrath, there, Liberal LMP Senator for Queensland. Keep an eye out for that debate. It's an interesting one. It could be a big change in our electoral processes.